Marlowe. I am the interim coordinator for student support services and the school safety coordinator. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the school safety and specifically the Maryland Center for School Safety and the Safe to Learn Act. So first I'm going to start off with the Maryland Center for School Safety. Maryland Center for School Safety is reorganized in the Safe to Learn Act of 2018. It existed for several years in the past, but recently it was reorganized in the Safe to Learn Act to make it more comprehensive, increase the number of staff, and make it more accountable to the school districts. They're an independent unit within the Maryland State Department of Education, so they fall under the superintendent of schools, but they're independent in that they are staffed by people from the governor's office. They're governed by the School Safety Subcabinet, and this is composed of several people. One of these, the State Superintendent of Schools, the Superintendent of State Police. They have the Attorney General, as well as some other people up there you can see. And then lastly here they have a school psychologist. One of the reasons they put this school psychologist on there is because they recognize that that mental health and those behavior services are an important part of school safety. So the job of the Maryland Center for School Safety, their main thing is to collaborate with local school systems and to kind of coordinate school safety and security throughout the state to make sure that all the school districts are meeting a certain standard. They provide us with some information on how best to conduct our business, as well as technical assistance and training. This is important from the aspect of school resource officers. Starting this summer, they're going to require that all school resource officers in the state attend the training sponsored by the Maryland Center for School Safety. So previously there were a number of organizations that would provide this training. Beginning with this year, it's going to have to come through the Maryland Center for School Safety. In addition to that, the Maryland Center for School Safety administers the Safe Schools Fund grant, and they also collect data on school safety for the state. So we have to, at the end of this year, starting the end of this year and subsequent years, provide them with data on exactly how school safety is going in our district. So that's kind of a brief summary of that. From that same Maryland Safe to Learn Act that was passed over this last summer, they required that districts establish 2 new positions related to school safety. And the first of those is kind of a lot of words up there, but the important part is the bold part, is they said that every school district has to have a school safety coordinator. And a couple requirements there is that they have to be certified by the center, and they're in the process right now of coming up with what that certification means, but it's basically going to require them to take a number of FEMA incident command classes and possibly the SRO course. And then the next thing that they required, and this is a lot more words, but it's the Mental Health Services Coordinator. And basically what this is a person who coordinates with the local mental health services such as the health department, the hospital, and social services to ensure that students have these mental health wraparound services that they need. So how this was handled at ACPS prior to this being established was all of these fell under one position, and that was the supervisor of student services. And they did a number of things, including those things you see listed up there that included safety. This person also happened to be the supervisor of health and PE, and that kind of mental health services fell under that as well. So this person left at the beginning of the school year, and that was changed to, those duties were split up into 4 people. So we still had the supervisor of student services, and most of those duties were handed over to the supervisor of special education. We had some of the disciplinary hearing and home and hospital tasks that that person did assigned to a lead PPW, the pupil personnel worker. And then a new position was established, the coordinator of student support services, and that's my job. I'm also the designated school safety coordinator. And in addition to school safety, I handle a couple other things like bullying and dropout prevention and some other student support service programs like that. And then lastly, the supervisor of health and PE, which previously had been a separate position, but as the number of staff in the central office was reduced, that was combined into one person, and now it's been split back out into 2. That person is also the mental health services coordinator. So So that's a summary of the two positions related to safety that are required by that Maryland Safe to Learn Act. The next thing that the Maryland Safe to Learn Act requires is that schools have SROs for adequate law enforcement coverage. So what this means, and this is the verbiage from the law itself, but it basically says starting with next school year, next school year, 1920 school year, that all schools have to have a school resource officer, and you can see in bold there, or adequate local law enforcement coverage. So when they passed this law, there was no one knew exactly what that meant, what adequate local law enforcement coverage is. So we've been working to try and figure that out. But basically, if I can get this to go, there we go. It overshot. Okay, yeah, so basically, a school resource officer or adequate local law enforcement coverage. So if you look in the law, what a school resource officer is two things. One, they're a law enforcement officer. They have to be a sworn officer, and they have to be affiliated with a law enforcement agency. Maryland state law is very specific on what a law enforcement agency is. It can't be just something that you create on your own. It has to be recognized by the state as such. And so that school resource officer, that's what they are. This is different from a school security employee, which this was also defined in the law, and this is the exact verbiage from the law as well. And it says basically a school security employee is anyone who is not an SRO, and they're employed by the school district. So initially, before this law was passed, what the General Assembly Legislative Services does is they come out with a policy note, a fiscal and policy note, and what that does is it looks at the law and it says, what's the financial impact of this law going to be? And if we can get it to do it, there it is. So what they said was, in that law, they didn't say how many, what does that mean? How many is enough SROs, or what is adequate law enforcement coverage? They didn't give a number because they didn't want to set something and say, this is what you have to do. But what they said is, if you had adequate coverage, assuming that coverage was one SRO per high school, or one SRO for every 2 middle and elementary schools, then your coverage would look something like this for ACPS. And if you look there, with our 22 schools and the number of high schools that we have in elementary and middle schools, it says that we should have roughly about 11 SROs based on the number. Now in the original fiscal and policy note, they actually said 15, but they were basing that on a number of 26 schools, which is not the number of actual buildings that we have. We have 22 schools, 22 school buildings. I'm not sure where they got that number, but 11 SROs would be what they estimated. Now this was their estimate before the law was passed. This was before anyone knew what that meant. What does adequate coverage mean? What's a good number of SROs? So what we did with myself and safety directors around the state, as well as law enforcement administrators from around the state, had a couple of meetings to try to determine what this means. And basically what they came up with, they said there's no evidence-based number of SROs per school. They didn't want to say there was one, that you need one per school, because in reality that's not obtainable in the near future. They didn't want to say that, they would come up with a specific number. So, and the reason is that because that's based on a number of factors, or the number of variables that come into effect there. For example, in one of the cases, I believe it was in Frederick County, they had an elementary school that had more calls for service from the police than the high school that did. So in that case, they could justify putting an SRO in an elementary where they wouldn't put it in a high school. So it really depends on the local situation, and they want to leave that up to the local districts to come up with that number. They did give a recommendation, and this was what NASRO offers, and NASRO is the National Association of School Resource Officers, and they recommend one SRO per 1,000 students, and that's district-wide. So right now, for example, in Allegheny County, we have about 8,500 students, so that number will be closer to 8.5 SROs. Now, what the Maryland Center for School Safety said is that school districts should use that number as a guide, and then from there, we need to work with the local law enforcement agencies to augment that coverage. So since then, this came out of their guidance on December 4th. Since then, they've backed away from that NASRO number because they don't want to endorse NASRO, because NASRO is a vendor that provides SRO training. So they backed away from that, and they want to let school districts come up with that number on their own in conjunction with local law enforcement agencies. So this kind of goes into what I was talking about a minute ago. So once we figured this out, we figured out what we needed to do. We had a meeting with all of the heads of the law enforcement agencies in the county, and figured out what we need to do, what that means. And one of these things is getting the number of SROs from these different agencies, and the other is getting that extra coverage, that adequate local coverage. So what we decided is that we need to draft a number of memorandums of understanding, and what those will do is kind of come up to an agreement between us and the law enforcement agencies to figure out exactly how they're going to cover our schools. So for example, if an SRO isn't in a particular school, is there going to be a deputy from the sheriff's office in the vicinity, or will they have somebody stop in and check into the school on occasion? And that's kind of the direction that we're going with that. One of the things that they've agreed to do right away is they're increasing the number of patrols in the areas of schools. And right now they're doing that with funding through that Safe Schools Fund grant that we recently received. And that it pays for their overtime for that. So this is what our SRO coverage looks like right now. Now if you look over on the left side, the two light blue bubbles there, those are our security officers that we have. We have two security officers in the school district that are not SROs as defined by the law. And the next column there, those are the SROs we have from the Cumberland Police Department. And then the next one is from Allegheny County Sheriff's Office. Up until about a couple weeks ago, we actually had 3 in that column, but we lost one due to a staffing issue on their part. And then on the next column there, under Allegheny Sheriff's Office, we also have another position there that is staffed by a special police officer, and I'll get to what that means in a couple of minutes here. And then finally, in the last column is Frostburg Police Department, and we have 1 SRO through them. So if we were to use that 1 to 1,000 ratio and say that's kind of the guide that we want to go with, what that means for the different agencies in our county, the Cumberland Police Department, we have 3,800 students who attend school in one of the Cumberland schools within Cumberland jurisdiction. So that would be about 3.8 SROs. And then following in Allegheny County, we have 3,200 students or 3.2 SROs. And last, Frostburg State with 1,500 students attend school in that jurisdiction. So I think this is kind of what would be a good goal to shoot for. We're almost there in some cases. We're working right now with the county and the sheriff's office to try to get some of the funding for these things. So to step away from that for a second, I want to talk about the Special Police Commission and what that means, because we have 2 of those people on our staff currently. The Special Police Commission is a license that's administered by the Maryland State Police. It falls under this category of license here. So there are a number that they offer, including for security guards, private detectives, and such. It's one of those. And what special police do is, well, no, this is who can request a special police commission. Pretty much anyone. If you look down there, as long as you're a legal business or you're any kind of government entity, you can request to have a special police commission or someone with a special police commission. In fact, if anybody's been, I think it's the Chat and Chew over on the west side of the county, the person who owns that has a special police commission to protect his business, and that's what it's designed to do, is so businesses and various entities can protect their property. These powers that the special police have, first is they're allowed to arrest individuals who trespass on or commit offenses on their property. So they basically have police powers within the confines of their property. And they're also, in some circumstances, allowed to direct traffic on public roads adjacent to the property. And that is based on whether or not that particular person has had training in directing traffic. So for Allegheny County, for the two that we have, this is, it's subject to MOUs with the local law enforcement agencies. So we have to have an agreement first with the local law enforcement agency saying exactly what they can do. In our case right now, our folks that we have, they have the power to detain someone. So if someone commits